Okay. Okay, so we are on. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We can get a few reactions in the chat about the sound if everything is all right. We can start soon. Okay, so welcome everybody to today's webinar by UX Tweak. Today's guest will be Vitaly Friedman, which I'm sure everyone is excited about. And the plan for today will be a few words about UX Tweak. Then we will listen to the presentation by Vitaly about how to measure UX and design impact. And after the presentation, there will be a live Q&A with Vitaly. So please make sure to put any questions that you might have into chat, and we will try our best to answer as many of those as possible at the end. Okay, so a little bit about UXTweak. For those who do not know about us yet, UXTweak is a all-around UX research platform which enables you to test your product with many different approaches throughout the whole life cycle of your product, starting off with more low-level studies such as card sorting or tree testing. You can also focus on your users with our preference test, 5-second test, or surveys. If you want to test usability, we have 4 different tools for this approach, each one taking on a different aspect of your product. And finally, if you want to schedule an interview with your participants, you can with our live interviews. As mentioned, you can test on websites, mobiles, and your prototypes. UXTweak is not just a research platform. We also help you with recruiting participants for your studies. With our user panel, the quality is always guaranteed. You can recruit for any study type that we have available. We have basically a worldwide coverage, and we are proud to always offer fair incentives to our participants, depending on the complexity of the study that they participate in. So with all of this, you can recruit, conduct, analyze, and share UX research all in one place with UXTweak. If you like this webinar and you want to learn more about UX from experts from all around the world, you can join our podcast, the UXR Geeks podcast, hosted by our colleague Tina. And our today's guest, Vitaly, was also a guest in this podcast. And let me introduce the guest of today's webinar, Vitaly Friedman. Hi, Vitaly. How are you today?
Hello, hello. Oh, hold on. Now I think you should be able to hear me, maybe. Hold on, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Ah, yes,
Yes,
yes.
we do.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here. So thank you so much for having me. Very excited.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I think that most people know you as a seasoned UXer, the founder of Smashing Magazine, and what I have learned today that you are a fan of ironing. Please
I
tell me
am.
more about that.
Oh, yes, we could have a full session on irony because I think there is nothing that's more soothing, comfortable, and peaceful than irony. I think, if anything, I would highly recommend everyone to just dive in. We should actually have a podcast. Do you feel like you want to launch another podcast on ironing alone? Like all the different types of irons, and don't get started with the steamers. Steamers are no. No. And I really mean
Well,
like ironing. It's not like Iron Man or anything. It's just ironing the t-shirts and socks and whatever. We could have a full session on that, but probably we shouldn't.
yeah, with ironing, it straightens the things out, right?
Absolutely, in so many ways. I see what you did there. Yeah.
Okay, so I could go on about the career that you have behind you, but in my opinion, the best way the people will learn about what you have learned is when you tell them with the presentation that you have prepared right now. So I will not be taking any more time from that, and I will just be happy watching you talk about how to measure UX and design impact. Thank you again for joining us today, Vitaly, and the stage is yours.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me. Well, dear friends, I come to you in peace. And what I mean by that is very often when we as designers think about the wonderful work, the wonderful, impactful work that we're producing, very often it feels almost like dangerous. Like why would you even think about, measuring our precious pixels that we're designing with so much love and care and passion and attention, right? And the reason why I'm actually coming into this world of measuring UX is actually very simple. It's not because I'm obsessed with metrics and ironing, although I am obsessed with ironing, but I'm not really obsessed with metrics. And I'm really not a big fan of measurements in the first place. It's just not really me. I just want to create things that is meaningful. But the problem is that very often, if I want to create things that are meaningful, I need to be very deliberate, very strategic, and also, I guess, in some ways, quite opinionated about what we're going to work on and what we are not going to work on. And over the last, I don't know, I would say 15, 16, 17 years, I ended up working in a bunch of different projects, from corporate enterprise B2B to public service, banks, insurances, you name it. Sorry, I think I got a cold. You name it. And most recently, over the last 5 years or so, I've been spending quite a bit of time really in a space that was very uncomfortable for me in the beginning. Because every time I walk in a project these days, I'm being asked one thing that maybe you have been asked as well. Namely, how can you showcase and explain the impact of the work that you're going to do? How can you justify that amount of effort that you need to put into, from research and design to prototyping and user testing and all of that? And more specifically, how do you then actually measure UX and design impact? And that's sort of what I want to kind of look in a lot of detail today. This has kind of many different components, because one thing is just explaining what we can do and how we can be impactful, right? The other thing is how do we actually measure those things specifically, those design initiatives that we're initiating, and also those things that we actually want to, I guess, be most impactful, right, in terms of the business outcome that we want to produce. But also then we need to be very careful and very also strategic around design KPIs and how we establish them, but also design KPI trees. We will see an example of that a little bit later. And also how do we even define the notion of design success and also visualize it and also report it to senior management. And all of this kind of starts, for me at least, with a very simple question. What kind of impact do we actually produce as designers? I mean, sure enough, when you look around, these pixels that we kind of create with so much love and care, they are not coming for free. Like, we put a lot of effort and thinking into this with the hope, I guess, that many of those pixels put together will actually produce some sort of a desirable outcome. They also must match two things, right? They must meet users' needs, but they also must be kind of moving towards the business objectives or business targets that we actually are being, where our work is framed within, right? So we always have the business objectives and the user needs that we have to respect. And to understand that, we kind of need to go all the way back first. And I kind of like this very old, at this point, from 2006, framework by Jesse James Garrett, in which he was speaking about 5 layers of user experience. Many of you might be familiar with this as well. But we have 5 S's. Well, that came out wrong. 5S is moving from very concrete to very abstract. Hold on, need to drink. Right? Where we actually have a surface on the top, which is kind of the UI layer, but it's just something that we're really, really excellent at. I mean, at this point, when I look at you, I mean, I don't see you, but I can feel you in the chat. I will look, if somebody asks you to design a beautiful button, you got it. You know how to do it. You'll do it just well. I have no doubts about that. But on the other hand, as we're moving from concrete to abstract, that becomes a bit more difficult. I mean, at this point, we are still excelling. We know how to deal with skeleton screens and layout and content design, maybe also information architecture. We're going to do card sorting and tree testing, looking at direction design and accessibility. But then we also move slowly to business side of things, where we're looking at the functional and content requirements, but also strategic needs, both business side and user side. And all of them are kind of considered to be UX. And in fact, when I look at this today, it seems like most teams that are trying to hire UX designers, they are looking for full stack designers who can do just everything in everything. And it's very, very hard to do because it's such a broad space. But this is a quite, established model that we've seen for a while. I kind of like to think about it a bit differently. And you'll see in a moment why I'm speaking so much about this. It's because I think, to me, I guess the most significant part, and this is probably what I'm doing most of my life now, right?
Vitaly,
Yes?
just a second. It seems like the feed to your presentation has cut off. Can you please
okay.
reshare it again?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know. No?
Yeah, we can see it right now.
Yeah, should I go full screen?
Yes.
So let me know if it's. Please feel free to interrupt me at any point. By the way, it's perfectly fine. So if something drops off or whatever, just let me know.
Okay, everything is good now.
So far so good. All right, excellent. Sorry about that, friends. So basically, what I like to think of is kind of looking at the lens of what I'm doing through this model or this framework in here, because we have reality. Now, that reality that we have in front of us is very messy. It's very complex, it's very contradictory, it's always changing, and we cannot really know it fully. Well, right. So this is the real world that we kind of have to deal with. But on the other hand, when we actually look into the problem space, right, problem space is nothing but an attempt to map that complex reality, right, into something that we can understand. And that requires monitoring, that requires observations, that requires kind of understanding the domain, the user needs, and so on and so forth. And the closest we get to users understand what they're actually doing with our product, the best we can actually do that. Now, my way to translate reality into problem space is always the same. And this will become very important as we go through the rest of the presentation. I always try to understand what the hell are people doing in our product? Like, literally. Not in terms of what we think they're doing, because there's often a mismatch between what we believe they're doing and what they're actually doing, because people are very good at bending the rules, finding the shortcuts, moving around features they don't understand, and so on and so forth. What are they actually doing? So the first question I'm asking most of the time, to map reality into the problem space, give me 12 representative tasks. 12 tasks. 12 tasks that we know people are doing, coming from our data, coming from our research, coming from our analytics, or anything else. What are the types of tasks that people are performing, right? Not just, let's look at our customer journey maps. No. I want to have a real evidence-based representation of what are people actually doing in our product and what this product is actually supposed to serve. And then, of course, once we know and understand this problem space, if we map the reality well enough, then we can move to solution space. And this is typically where we excel. Oh, we know this stuff so well. I mean, we are really, really great at this in 2025. However, if you actually look at it and start thinking, right, the problems start appearing when you actually have a wrong translation between reality and the problem space, right? And very often what happens is we kind of tend to oversimplify or we tend to overcomplexify, if it's even a word. Finding that balance is usually very, very tricky. Now, you will see in a moment when I'm actually speaking about this so much. Now, as I'm going from reality into problem space and then from problem space to the solution space, right, I kind of start really trying to understand what is that impact and where can I make an impact. Now, if my mapping of reality into problem space is biased, is wrong, is confusing, is based on assumptions, is based on the strongest opinion in the room, right, then these things that we're going to work on here, these solutions we're going to work on have no impact at all, because they're totally missing on the needs that we actually need to support, right? So kind of need to be very, very careful about that. And if there are some strong assumptions that come in, I always try to understand the stakeholder mapping around me. So if, let's say, I'm working somewhere over here, this is maybe moving my UX efforts forward. When I was growing up, if you like, I was always thinking that if I just do good design work, like really good UX work and good accessibility work, surely people should be able to notice that. I mean, that's good for everyone, right? In the end, good UX is better for everyone. Good accessibility is better for everyone. And so surely, before I even know it, if I just do good enough work, it will show itself as a showcase of wonderful effort that could really make a change, and then this person will notice, and then this person will notice, and so on and so forth. Before I know it, the entire organization will be transformed. This never happened in my history, the history of my lifetime ever, because by default, if these people over here, and maybe over here, and maybe over there, are not involved, are not interested, don't even understand what the hell I'm working on, there's just no way they're going to support my investigations. So your impact will actually be dying out almost right here because this will never flow over to other directions or to other teams. You're gonna need to make it flow. By default, you will be blocked. In fact, I would like to challenge you to think if you're being perceived in your company organization where you're currently working on as an enabler or as a disruptor. Now, that question alone gives you sort of a sense about how, what the level of UX maturity you're looking at. So if you're being perceived as a disruptor because you always break things, you always change navigation, you always introduce some changes to the homepage and this and that, then that also gives us a sense about how far you can actually make it with your design impact. But if you're being perceived as an enabler, you have much better chances of succeeding. And despite the fact that most companies are organized this way, what you will find is that in reality, most organizations and most teams are operating ad hoc. It's not necessarily chaotic. It could be really kind of organized chaos where they know how things work and they just work this way. It's just the way of working. But as John Cutler had noted, right, well, there's this movement, like a lot of movement happening between things, reacting to whatever happens on the market, whatever happens in the product, whatever happens with priorities at business on the business side. And so you kind of move around and you identify new dependencies, and then you need maybe bring more people in the room, and then you understand that there is a lot of work in progress, so we need to really bring in focus into this. And then you have a lot of context switching with a lot of meetings, but you need to deliver, so you have a time pressure and you have to cut corners. It's all moving. So despite the fact that we believe that we are very well organized, very often the impact that we're trying to produce is challenged and restrained and constrained, I should say, by the environment in which we happen to find ourselves in, right? However, almost every single time, you will find that there are maybe 5 to 6 priorities that every company or every organization of any kind really cares about. These are 5 of them as highlighted by Jared Spool. Now, obviously, the most obvious ones are every company wants to increase revenue. It also wants to decrease costs. It also wants to increase new business, increase existing business, and increase shareholder value. Now, it's very difficult to say that, well, I'm working on filters or on search over here with my department, and we're going to increase shareholder value as a result of that. That's not going to happen. It will be very difficult for you to make that case. But if you make an impact by improving usability, improving accessibility, making things clearer, improving content design, improving UX writing, all the good stuff, typically you can always argue that by doing so, you can increase revenue, you can also decrease costs. That means customer service, maintenance costs, and stuff like that, but also conversion, of course, as well. Or just in general, you're kind of reaching out to wider audiences. So if you make things more accessible, it becomes also more inclusive. It also becomes more accessible to larger groups of people around the world, for example, right? That also increases new business too, right? There is one thing that's missing here. And the one thing that's missing, I think, is I really want to emphasize how important it is. It's the notion that we need to be very clear about design being not just a tool to ship a feature or to ship a change or to ship a flow. I want us to perceive it and actually present it as well in meetings as a risk mitigation tool, a risk management tool. Design is a fantastic risk mitigation tool. Most PMs, most businesses, they really want to reduce risk. This is what's missing here. They want to increase revenue, decrease costs, increase new business and existing business, increase shareholder value, and then also mitigate risk or reduce risks. If you can say that with that design work that you're producing, you're reducing the risk of investing literally maybe millions of dollars or euros on working on the wrong product or wrong project, on the wrong feature, because of course, if you just calculate the amount of man hours that would be required for engineers and designers and PMs and everybody to be involved, working on the wrong feature is ridiculously expensive. So think about really presenting your work as a wonderful tool to mitigate risks. That might really help. Not to mention, of course, is that most of the time we have this really strange perception of what we're working on. And it's really, really important for us to understand, because that impact that we're producing might be significant or it might be not that significant. But either way, we are very, very bad at arguing and articulating about that, right? Why? Well, because if you look around and you look on LinkedIn, you will find most of the time those kind of charts appearing. UX is the heart of everything. I mean, what are they without us, right? If you remove UX from the equation, there is nothing. Then you have just a broken product that cannot work, right? It does not carry technology, cannot carry business, and obviously there is no design, so it's all just broken and you can forget about it, right? I mean, we are literally in the center of the universe. They are nothing without us, which of course could not be further from the truth. Because most of the time, all organizations are organized like this. We have a leadership, strong leadership, weak leadership, top down leadership, bottom up leadership. There is always leadership. Leadership makes decisions. They are the ultimate decision makers, right? But then around those leadership people, there are always units, departments. There are marketing department, sales department, support department, and so on and so forth. And analytics and engineering and design, hey, that's us. Research, oh, that's also us. And then PMs, maybe also us. Business operations, and so on. What's really interesting about this, sales has a very clear, strong line of communication with leadership, right? I mean, it's probably quite common for leadership to have an insight into what sales are doing almost every minute of every day, right? Marketing, the same story. They're reporting to leadership all the time. Business operations report to leadership. PMs report to leadership. Finance report to leadership. Recruiting report to leadership. Support, well, they want to be able to see that all the issues are resolved and stuff like that. So every now and again, they will be indeed looking into that, right? But you need support. And then you have HR, analytics, and so on and so forth. But what do we report to management? Is there anything that you report to management on a regular basis? And what is that then? And very often you see that the only thing that we're reporting is the number of completed Jira tickets per month, which is basically just the velocity of the team. Sometimes you will also find design teams now employing story points and think about estimating the effort and complexity and stuff like that. Fair enough, right? But what is the impact that we are reporting? Because every other department, every other unit reports something which relates to that impact that they have produced. So what about us? Like, what about research impact? What about design impact, right? What about us? Well, what I started doing is trying to figure out how do we argue and explain that impact that we want to highlight to management, right? And I think it all starts with a very simple broadening of the horizon. So this is a wonderful illustration from Tony Fadell's book on Build, where as designers, right, we're often very focused on design, and we should be. This is our craft. This is what we love, and this is what we care about, right? But I would highly encourage you to really look and broaden the horizon to see what everybody else is doing and where they're succeeding, where they're failing. What it means is not that you have to be a full stack, not just full stack designer, but full stack everything. But it's extremely helpful to have strong relationships and connections across all the different departments and units. Marketing, engineering, sales. If you can befriend somebody from sales and customer success, that can be really, really valuable. Not because of politics or power play, but because we often want to be the voice of the customer. PMs always want to be the voice of the customer, but in reality, in most organizations, the voice of the customer is not PMs, it's not designers, it's not engineers, it's the customer success team or sales, because they speak to customers all the time. This is literally what they have to do all the time. Now, if you can have a very strong connection with sales, sometimes if you happen to be in an environment where you cannot really test because you have in B2B and you don't have enough users, or you don't have any access to users, you can always do at least something or proxy testing with sales. In fact, sometimes you can sit down with in the call with sales if you have a good relationship with them. So relationships are very, very important there, right? And so what I try to do is first trying to orient myself to figure out where I can make that impact. All right, so that's just that. That's impact. But what do we do with that? Well, if I know that there is an impact that we're producing, right, and I kind of established good relationship with the organization within the organization. So people who want to carry or want to kind of support me know that I exist and can carry my UX effort and that impact in action instead of rather than blocking it, right? The next tangible step that I would should take is to identify some metrics I could be using. And this brings us to design and UX metrics that we could apply. There are tons of them, and obviously when the point is not to cover all of that. This is not relevant. But it's important to understand what we even can measure and what we maybe should be measuring most of the time. Now, from the business side, this is what typically gets measured, right? We find this all over the place. And maybe in different parts of organization, maybe different units will probably cover some bits of that. But behavioral metrics analytics, we'll look maybe at something like session duration, traffic growth, and bounce rate. We have diagnostic metrics, which are like system uptime, feature utilization, ticket resolution time, security incident rate. Very technical, but obviously important. I mean, we want to have a high system uptime. We all want that. We want to have a high feature utilization rate. We all want that. We also all want to have a high ticket resolution, low, I say, ticket resolution time and low security incident rate. No problems there. The problems start when you actually start talking about this area. Because to me personally, and this is kind of where I want to be kind of really, really real, right? Well, I want to have a very clear I want to have a very clear roadmap in front of me how I'm going to argue about that impact that I'm producing. I don't want to have any random numbers that might mean that I'm successful and might mean that I failed. I want to see some numbers that clearly represent and showcase my success. So when I come in a big meeting and I'm going to report the efforts that we have been producing as a design team or UX team, I want to be very clear that it can be contributed and attributed to our work, right? So if you think about something like session duration, so you know that the session duration on a given website is 2 minutes 48 seconds. So what? Okay. So what were people doing there in these 2 hours 48 minutes? Oh, sorry, 2 minutes 48 seconds. I don't know. Were they successful in these 2 minutes 48 seconds? Or were they failing most of the time and then abandoning altogether? I just don't know. I can't figure out that stuff without actually doing some qualitative research, right? On the other hand, also things like traffic growth. I mean, it's easy to grow traffic. It's not a big deal, right? You bring in advertising, you spend an enormous amount of marketing, and you bring people in. Fantastic. But what's the value of that? How can it be connected to user successes? How can it be connected to UX impact in general? Yeah, so you bring more people. But if these people are not relevant, are not even your user base, not even your target audience, what's the point of increasing traffic? You don't want bad traffic or poor traffic or traffic that doesn't convert. You want good leads, right? That's the most important part. So I have quite a few issues here because I really don't know what to do with that. So personally, from the UX perspective, I find it relatively useless, right? Not all of that. Obviously, we do want to have a low bounce rate and we probably want to have a high click-through rate. But then if people click through but don't end up buying, or acting on something, then what's the point? We just bring them to the wrong place and they have to recover from that. That doesn't represent success to me. And then, of course, you have a lot of things on the right, which are kind of the business metrics. We'll look into how much money we're getting per month or per year, or customer lifetime value and cost per acquisition and activation rate and churn and of course NPS. And I'm sure that most of you will have heard of NPS already. But it's not all. Sometimes you just want to look and dive into specific artifacts, business artifacts that are being used there. And by the way, we have now been speaking for like, 25 minutes or 20 minutes, right? About anything but specific UX KPIs or UX metrics, because UX has to, kind of the work that I'm doing, it has to work flawlessly within the environment in which I happen to be. And that requires me to understand really well what is going on around me so it can fit. It should not feel like a foreign entity that we just, artificial foreign entity that just does something when we're just measuring something for the sake of it. It must be really well integrated in everything else that we know and we're doing in the company. So sometimes you will find that if you dive into some business metrics or you dive into some business deliverables or business artifacts, you will find also things like this. This is the so-called business flywheels. Sometimes you want to end up with having sort of a really profound, I guess, model of how different parts and different features that you're driving and different goals that you have interact and closely connected to each other, so they actually drive that thing that we want to drive, right? In the end, if we look at something like, again, Netflix here, Netflix wants more revenue, so they invest in better content that attracts more subscribers, and this brings them more revenue, right? And at the same time, they also just provide more content. They maybe don't necessarily produce content, but they just buy content, and then they also end up more subscribers, and then they also produce more revenue, right? This is just a simple example of that. And very often you will find similar flywheels all over business departments as well, right? But this is just kind of a business side of that. So what do I take from this then? Well, when we think about what we can do, I mean, there are certainly some features that we could be using, some metrics that we could be using. Some of them are coming, let me just jump in there to show you, from something that I said in the very beginning. Remember, I mentioned 12 tasks, 12 representative tasks. There is nothing more important for me than that. This is the start of my measurement journey, if you like. If I know what people are doing, right? And I know that these things are important and they have been approved by senior stakeholders or whoever I have to report to, then I can see, well, we just need to make sure that people who are doing these tasks, broken down by different personas, different groups and types of people, different level of expertise and so on, that when they fail, we help them recover. And when they succeed, they get the most value out of the product. So I want to maximize or dial up and down two areas. On the one hand, I want to dial down frustrations and anything that slows people down, that breaks the experience, and so on and so forth. This is typically slowness, performance, accessibility issues, content issues, and stuff like that. But on the other hand, I also want to maximize and dial up successes. Or specifically, I want to dial up success moments that people are experiencing. And how do I do that? Well, typically it includes a couple of components. And these metrics are examples of what you could be measuring, right? But I would never measure all of that. That's not the point. For a given project, there would be maybe, or product maybe even. If you're working, let's say, on search, right, there would be only maybe 3 to 4 key metrics that you'll be focusing on. Per team, I would never set up more than 4. That's probably too much. But 3 would be a good call, right? If you know what people are doing, right, you can say, well, let's just measure for this representative task that we have figured out, how successful people actually are with those tasks. And I think that this is something that you all probably feel comfortable and familiar with. Task success rate is something that we measure for a long time now. And this is very relevant because, again, if you look at the success rate in most products, you'll find that it's not uncommon to see something like 30-40% success rate in some organizations, some companies that have a pretty complex and products that actually maybe has some legacy involved and stuff like that. 30% success rate is pretty bad, right? But then, of course, people are very good at tweaking and finding workarounds and shortcuts and stuff like that. So we need to test with users who are actually using, or not using the product not only, but also who want to conduct and want to complete these tasks as a part of their work or need to do that, right? So we look at task success rate. Typically, anything below 80% is suboptimal. You want to be beyond 80% success rate in all 12 tasks that are representative. Then we also measure time on task. And the way we usually do it is really simple. I take my old iPhone and we give people tasks. And then whenever they start, we just click on a timer and then we see how fast they actually go through the task. And eventually they give an answer or try to complete it, try to import some portfolio or something like that, right? And then we see if they succeed or not. We mark that, if it's success or failure, and we also mark the timing. And then we look into the median time that we have there. Now, if you're designing forms, it might be much better to look into things like error recovery rate and error rates. For one project, we had to spend an enormous amount of time refining and rewriting error messages. I cannot emphasize enough how impactful that thing can be. However, to indicate how impactful this thing can be, you need to have before and after. So you need to have error recovery rate and error rates before and error recovery rate, error rate after the error messages have been redesigned. You need to have before and after. Otherwise, you cannot show any impact at all. If you are working on search, then what we have established is the notion of search quality score. Now, what could that be? Like, how do you define and measure search quality in UX? Well, it's actually quite simple. So you look what people are searching for. So a common task that we would have is, let's look at top 100 queries that people were searching for in our product or in our engine or in our tool or whatever it is that we have over the last couple of years, or maybe over the last year, or maybe over the last, I don't know, 2 months or so. And let's see what actually was showing up in search results for them, right? And then when we get this list of top 100 or so search queries over the last couple of months or last year or whatever, we go to editorial teams or to product teams and ask, so when the person is searching for this, what should actually appear? Just kind of give us sort of like maybe 3, 4, 5 URLs or pages or presets that need to appear or whatever it is that we have. So what should be there? So we have then 5 or like list items or so for each of the issues, right, that we, or for the search queries that we have, right? And once we have discovered that and we figured that out, what we could say next is, let's just map. Let's look at what is appearing today in top 5 or top 10 in our search results versus what should be there according to our editors or product people. And we do the match. Most of the time, you will find that the search quality score would be very, very low, sometimes as low as 10 or 15%, right? And that's problematic because I think in many ways, search is really, really critical. It's very, very important. And the best thing you can do if you have search and people are using search a lot, and you will find that sometimes people rely on search way more than navigation. You could find something like 70-30 or 80-20 even rates between them. Well, you need to have somebody whose sheer focus is on search and what is displayed in search and how search is working and all of that. And very often it's abandoned, kind of almost left on the side, which is kind of problematic, right? And also, if you look at something like onboarding, or if you have, let's say, like an empty state where you want to drive people to at least first success relatively quickly in the first session, right? Then we're kind of measuring the time to first success. At which point do they actually get something relevant out of the product, right? And then also, again, looking into forms, it's not just the speed of interaction, just how fast people are going through the form, but also the accuracy of input that they're actually providing. This is really, really important as well. So this, for me, is sort of like a golden selection of things that I usually would track. Again, remember, for a given product or project, I would never go beyond 3 or 4, right? So typically, I would almost always include task success rate, must be above 80%. Time on task, well, that depends on how complex the task is, right? There we're looking at something, if it's like reviewing a mortgage application, that will probably take more time than just finding some piece of information in a informational website somewhere, right? But typically, there is always a threshold. That threshold can be dictated by competition. So if somebody can do the same task with the competition in under 1.5 minutes, 1 minute 30 seconds, then we should be faster than that. So we can always track that. In fact, there are usually kind of 4 metrics, not 4 metrics, 4 states that we need to keep in mind for each metric. First, the baseline, meaning, well, where are we now in the very beginning before we even start changing anything? So we have a baseline. Then we might want to do this benchmark testing to see how competition is doing. Then we might want to be somewhere where we say, okay, this is a threshold. This is at least how good we want to be, right? And then with every quarter, as you kind of initiate new design initiatives, you want to say, we want to be a little bit faster or a little bit more accurate. That depends. Sometimes you need to be slower to be more accurate. Sometimes you need to be a little bit faster, right? That depends on what you want to achieve. So typically, you would be looking into these 4 dimensions and explore which ones of them would work best, right? But then, of course, you also have surveys. Plenty of surveys you could be using. What we have been using is System Usability Scale SUS. I will show it in a moment. Not because it's the fanciest of them all, it's just very old. I think it's from like 1990s or so. But usually I use it as a conversation starter. I find it very, very helpful, and I will show it in a moment as well. But there are plenty of others too, right? On the other hand, what you also find is that sometimes what we call TPI, or Task Performance Indicator, it's basically 12 representative tasks broken down by a particular vertical. So if you have, let's say, a search team, we define 12 tasks for search. When we have, let's say, a team that is doing import portfolio feature or something like that, or bulk import, then we define 12 tasks that people are doing there. That will, of course, include different type of files that people will be uploading and stuff like that. So we define 12 tasks there, and we measure them. So if you have all the different verticals, and each of them measures task performance indicator, being task success rate and time on task, then you can actually average all of them and report up to senior management something that would be representative for the entire UX effort, UX department, right? So that can be quite powerful. And if you can see that you are performing and improving, you know, this task performance indicator, task success rate, time on task, across all these departments, then all of a sudden it actually will be noticed, because again, you're improving the overall task success rate and time on task, which everybody can understand, right? By the way, just to make it very clear, the system usability skill that I mentioned, which we're relying on as well, it's a very simple 10 items questionnaire. Well, it has 10 items right there. The average score is 68, and SUS is usually a good leading indicator, which, as it turns out, and there are studies on that, correlates with NPS. Now, there are studies that also saying that it does not correlate with NPS, so we kind of need to be quite careful there. But the recent study from measuringyou.com has actually highlighted that there are some strong indicators that it does correlate with NPS. And the way it looks is very simple. Kind of has a couple of questions like this. I think I would like to use the website frequently. I found the website unnecessarily complex. I thought it was easy to use. I thought there was too much inconsistency on the site. And you can choose whether you strongly disagree or strongly agree, and you go through it, right, through the entire form. These are 10 questions listed over here, and by the end of that, you get a score. But that score is then calculated, and then if you are below 68, that's pretty bad. If you happen to be beyond 80, that's considered to be very, very good, right? So we are looking at trying to be here, of course. And by the way, only few websites, only few products are actually there, right? So there is that. Now, how do we bring it all together? Well, if we actually look at the different ways of how we could measure, SUS being one of them, there are plenty of others. I mean, there is a strong correlation between SUS and UMUX Lite, which is just 2 items questionnaire, which also correlates with SUS and NPS. Its average is 4 and has only 2 questions. The system's capabilities meet my requirements. Number 1, the system is easy to use. Number 2, literally 2 questions, and that's it. And what you can do with that is you can basically map the results for your product and for your competition against a metrics like this, where you can actually map usefulness against usability. And then you can see how well you're performing against competition, right? On the other hand, what you also find is something that's called SEQ, which is 1 question, 7-point Likert scale, where the average score is 5.5, where we actually just want to understand how easy or difficult it is for users to complete a task or kind of complete something. Overall, it could look like this. Overall, this task was very difficult or very easy, right? And again, what you end up with is, if you want to be on the higher end, then you probably are looking at something like 6 plus as a score. Very simple, one simple question. So when we bring this together, what I started kind of working on is creating little scorecards, UX scorecards like this. Very simple. And I want to emphasize, it's not like a big science, like, hey, let's just go in and change everything, like throw in huge questionnaires with 100 questions and run it every week. No, you don't need that. If you have 12 tasks that you want to test, well, you bring in 15 to 18 people. That's, there was this wonderful article by Nikki Anderson on LinkedIn around what does it mean statistically significant, and how important it is that it's statistically significant. Well, I would say, sure, you can bring in 100 people, 200 people, 300 people, but usually what we learned is that after 20, 25 people, you start noticing patterns. You start noticing that people are either really good at something, and it's because it's very simple to do, or they really get into trouble. And so you kind of understand if you're moving in the right direction or not. And if your success rate is above 80% every single time you run the test, then there is something to it. Of course, that depends on how careful you are in selecting people who are going to complete these tasks. So what you can establish is very simple. You can say, well, let's just track a few things. Like, first of all, let's track different success rates for a couple of tasks. Maybe you don't go with 12. Maybe you go with 5 or 6 or 4 or 3 even in the beginning. Just make a launch little project and then off you go, right? So you have your task and then you ask people to complete them. And you see how successful they are. And of course, if you go beyond 80%, that's already pretty good. If you're beyond 90, that's excellent. Most of the time, the experience will not be like that. You can also ask maybe with the survey, maybe via email, maybe with a kind of little pop-up or so after somebody has used the feature, how easy it was to use. Here, and here, you get a score from that. Fantastic. You might also want to run something like a survey where you can ask these two questions. Usability metrics for UX Lite, UX Lite. The system's capabilities might meet my requirements. The system is easy to use. So you get a score from here. And then from there, you can actually use linear regression to transform UX Lite into SUS. Again, just as a reminder, I'm using SVS just because it's a good conversation starter. So when we run a session and we give people tasks, and usually it's moderated, by the way, there is always a moderator and there is always a note taker. And so a moderator will guide the person through, how the process and then give tasks. And what we do is we don't have any speak aloud protocol. No, nada, nothing. Instead, we just give tasks. We ask people to confirm it and understand the task, and we'll let them do it. And we just stop talking. We don't talk. We just observe. That's all we do. Usually on Zoom, we just observe. And then whenever they feel like they're done, right, they will tell us that they are done. And this is where we're measuring the time, right? Because if we measure the time while they were speaking, that wouldn't be honest, because people don't speak when they're completing the work, right? That's just not what's happening. We want to be as realistic as possible. So instead, we just give them tasks, and then they complete. We don't give them a response if that's okay or not. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. Thank you so much for this. Let's move on to the next task, right? And then they complete these tasks, and then we do debriefing, right? During the briefing, we ask a couple of questions about things that we have noticed, but also we ask them to complete that SUS survey that I was showing earlier, right? And in that SUS survey, they kind of select what's difficult to use, I need the support of a technical person to use it or anything like that, right? And then because we've been observing how people are feeling in that form, right, we can actually have a proper debriefing. Because if I only had these two questions, that's not a conversation starter. It kind of almost ends the conversation. It's very, very difficult to make something meaningful out of that, right? So with that, then what does it mean? Like, where are we going with this? Well, if you want to explore this world of design KPIs, there are plenty of things you could be measuring. What I have shown is just a kind of an overview of things that I find quite helpful and I find quite useful in the work that I'm doing. But typically, it would be something like this. We will be measuring top task success time, top task success rate, sorry, time to complete. These are just numbers that represent examples of what we're looking at. Time to value, that would be something like, again, when you are just entering a new product and you need to understand what it's doing and bring in something that's relevant to you into this, how much time does it take? Search results quality, frequency of errors that occur in the form, how often people then recover from error messages, accuracy of data, system usability scale, we saw that already, accessibility performance. Well, mostly we also highlight that in our dashboard because it's also performance and accessibility is a part of user experience. So sure enough, it should be there. But also other things that we often don't think about. Remember what I mentioned in the beginning, right? Companies want to increase revenue, but they also want to decrease costs. So how do we show that? Well, we can look into sales and marketing costs. If the product speaks for itself, sales and marketing will have to spend less time and effort and money to bring in more customers in. Right? That also means that we will have fewer service desk inquiries. If people can find whatever it is that they're looking for on the website, then that's just not going to happen, right? But also, you could also improve the time to release an update because we have some consistency around UX and the work that we're producing there, right? And again, also time to first success. Most recently, we started looking into environmental impact as well. That, of course, relates to performance, but also just the amount of time somebody would spend in front of the screen trying to complete a task, right? Hotlines, calls. Sometimes you have click-through rates, but we call it high intent action rate because, again, what I'm looking for is not somebody clicking on a button. Click doesn't represent success to me. But if I know that person who is clicking on the button also take that action, that gives me some insight. Now, that's a good thing to have. And also, by the way, when we're looking into something like newsletters, very often we see this pop-up showing up, and I'm always very confused because these pop-ups don't bring any value most of the time because people are very good in being selective in the email that they're providing. And so very often people have, I think, 3.5 or 3.6 different emails. So when you're asking them as an e-commerce site, for example, for an email, they will be providing you this trashy email that they never check. They will check it only to get the coupon code, and then they will never open your emails again. as emails, as business owners, we don't want this kind of emails. We want good emails, right? So the question is, how many poor leads that never open emails, never click on any buttons or any links on it? What's the ratio of those leads? We kind of need to track that. That also relates then in the end to the UX work, right? And I know that, and I'm sorry that I'm being a little bit late here, but I know that some of you might be wondering, sure, that's great, Vitaly, that's fantastic. But we are living in B2B and enterprise world. We can't invite users. We don't have users maybe yet, or we have NDAs, or we have reasons. Well, when you look into B2B and enterprise, the world is of course a little bit different, right? But I think the most important thing and change for me there, well, sure enough, maybe we don't have access to users, but I would always ask, why is that? And the true reason for most of the time, at least in my experience, is it's not like users are these holy creatures that you cannot touch. Most of the time, it's just not very clear to senior management, why would you want to talk to them? Why would you want to disturb this carefully articulated, carefully orchestrated relationship that we have with our suppliers or with our clients with your technical usability testing? Is it really necessary? That doesn't seem necessary to me, right? This is kind of the HT that comes in there. So we need to explain why we're actually doing this, and the way of how I speak about it is always the same. It's very simple. I never speak about usability testing. I never speak about inclusive design in that regard either. I speak about efficiency. Because we measure a lot of things. Typically, the enterprise product will have some sort of benchmarking, like security score being one of them, right? So we measure security, right? We all agree that security is important, right? We all do. We also look into legal compliance, so we should look into accessibility at least as a bare minimum, because again, this is what we need to comply with the European Accessibility Act, right? But then also usability is a side of that. But I also highlight it as efficiency score. Not usability score, but efficiency score. How efficient are people who are going to end up using the product? The end users. How efficient are they going to be with the product, right? Because we don't want to sell a product that doesn't meet end customers' expectations, and with that also the vendors' expectation, suppliers, companies' expectation. So some of you, again, just kind of come back here, might live in this world. You can't run stakeholder interviews because they're too busy. You can't run competitor analysis because it's not public yet, the product that you're working on. You might not be able to run data analysis because there is no data collected yet. They might not be able to run user interviews because there is no users yet. Or you cannot really interview potential users because of IP concerns. The same goes for usability testing, by the way. You can't do concept testing or prototypes testing because of NDA. You can't do any sentiment analysis because there is no media presence yet. Can't run any surveys because no users to send to. You can't speak to support because there is no clearance. You can't study help desk tickets because no clearance. And you can't use any research tools and any platforms like maybe XTweak and others because no procurement. So many of you might be feeling in this environment, like you are living in this environment. And if you do, please write a plus in the chat. I'm just very curious. I'm going to look it up. Right. So what can you do then? Now, this is my cheat sheet of what I would try to do. Remember what I said in the very beginning. Now, this is where everything comes together. If you cannot come to customers, you can maybe come close to customers or close enough to customers. Sure enough, you could maybe do some shadowing if you're lucky, right? But you can also communicate something potentially through customer success or sales, right? But for me, it starts with a very, very simple stuff. All right, I don't have access to users. Great. Okay, well, can you tell me what is it that people are doing here again? Right? What are the requirements that our product must meet, right? And also just what kind of tasks people are performing, and then we can run task analysis on that. We study workflow and processes that people are applying. Maybe we could study job postings to map roles and tasks, right? Dear friends, I'm almost finished, just a moment, right? We can also understand and try to find frequent pain points and challenges that they're experiencing by looking at Google reviews and whatever, if it's applicable, right? We can also look for search queries and Google Trends to understand what people are looking for, right? Maybe we could try to build a service blueprint. Maybe you could find and study people with similar tasks, and then you get closer to users, right? Shadow people, maybe interview colleagues who are closest to the business or who are closest to the users. Customer success domain experts, and then in the end, maybe building an internal UX testing lab and invite people in, right? And in the end, it all starts very simply with building trust and confidence with stakeholders who then hopefully will be approving you there, right? And again, these are the things then that they are measuring, right? Again, we're measuring reliability, we're measuring software quality, we're measuring compliance, measuring customer success. That's already close enough to our UX world. But one thing that is missing now is efficiency. And then I establish my favorite tasks that I can establish, right? The task success and others. And sometimes you find this efficiency representing itself through a bunch of things like this: failure frequency, length of use, application processing time, task success, complaints, training effectiveness, workload assessment, and many, many others. There are plenty of those out there. So you can basically just get lost in this. This is quite a big space in there. All right. So with that in mind, and I think I spent a lot of time talking, almost losing my voice at this point. Sorry about that, my friends. What do we get from this? Well, when we're looking into this metrics world, it's a daunting world. It's not something that we are used to, and very often feels almost difficult to measure anything. And I think I want to emphasize one thing very clearly. Remember again that every single department, every single unit reports something to leadership. We often don't. But if you measure something, you become accountable for that. So that means that if you have a task success rate of 30% today, and it remains 30% in half a year, then you will look bad in the eyes of your manager. So if you start measuring, you also become accountable for what you're measuring. Now, sure enough, you need to be very clear and very cautious in the process of how you're choosing the right initiatives to work on, right? And how you choose the priorities of what you think, together with your PMs, of course, what you think will be driving the highest impact, and also has a slightly lower chance of being kind of failing. If you're interested in that, I can also show you an example, maybe Q&A, if you ask for it in the chat as well, of how this could work, right? But this is something that you need to keep in mind. It doesn't come for free. So whenever you start measuring, you become accountable for what you're measuring, right? However, overall, typically you will be looking at a mix of different metrics. So I would say no more than 4. It must work well with business KPIs. If you can, please avoid NPS if you can, or use it as a brand health metric if you must. But either way, I wouldn't. I mean, I've never seen a company that will measure only NPS ever. They usually measure something else as well. But typically, you might make that case that if you improve usability, then loyalty increases and NPS would increase as well. But it's a very weak case that you're building up here, right? You can use SUS or flavors of that to assess the state of experience, but you always need to have the snapshot before and after. That's important. That I didn't show, but it's basically a way to use something that's called feedback scoring and gap analysis, where you identify where you currently are by having, let's say, 5 or 6 statements, and then you ask people to agree or disagree with them. And then you map out a little spider chart out of that. And then you try to identify which areas you want to move towards. I can maybe show it in the Q&A as well. But the starting point for me would be to identify user segments and top tasks for each, right? There are plenty of different metrics, again, that we could be using. And then, of course, again, depending on the velocity of the team and how fast you're rolling out features or you're rolling out changes, you might want to track this top task success rate and top task success times, maybe every 6 months, maybe every 12 months, maybe every 3 months, right? Because it also takes time. It takes around, well, you need to find the right people and all of that. I would say it takes around 40 hours in total for 2 people. So that's like a lot of effort potentially that needs to go into this. So, you can consider that. And typically also you can measure anything, including design systems, when we're looking at the relative design adoption. Although the better way to track and measure the effectiveness of a design system is asking a simple question of how frequently and how proactively, I would say, the team is using a design system in the first place. And if you are looking or interested in this in more detail, you will find quite a lot of stuff around measuring UX in a video course that I launched, a couple of months ago, on measuring UX, how to measure UX, www.measure/ux.com, and you get a friendly coupon code, 20% off uxtweak.com with the code UXTweak. And also, just because we're talking about this, if you want to get that, you also can get a smart interface design patterns, which is another course that I launched as well, and you get a bundle for both, and it's a really good price. I'm really bad at selling anything, but I was told I should mention that. So UX Tweak, 20% off on that. Whew, that's it from my end, dear friends. So with this come cats and a few more cats. And thank you so much for being here and listening. And I hope it was useful. And I'm very much looking forward to any questions that you might have in the chat.
Thank you so much, Vitaly. It's been a great presentation.
Oh,
I
thank you so
think
much.
everyone who joined enjoyed it, and we had a lot of people discussing stuff in the chat as well. So let's start off with the questions that
Sure.
I'm sure you are already looking forward to.
Just, just one thing that I want to mention as well, that if you stick around, I'm happy to show some of the things that might relate to the process behind it. But first I'm going to answer for all the questions that you have.
Alrighty then. So let's start with the questions.
Sure.
First one is a little bit of a uh, tough topic. In today's world, how can you make the case that using UX people has higher rate of return than using AI? I think
Well,
this is a tough topic always for
yes,
every UXer.
yes. So, okay, so I have opinions about this, right? A few strong opinions. So I would say that there are two parts of this story. So on the one hand, there are a lot of tools that allow you to basically run some simulations or testing based on information that internet provides. So you can define AI personas, and then these personas could basically, test your experience, test your products, test your services, and so on. For me, this could only be helpful as a part of a discovery. Then I'm just trying to understand what are some of the issues that maybe are occurring. But I would always choose 1 hour with an actual user who is using this product that we are designing over any hundreds and thousands of simulations with AI. The reason for that is very simple. I think that most of you might be in the same position as well. I realize that I learn way more from one single session about how people are behaving, where they don't click, where they don't move, what they don't do, what features they abandon or leave or don't understand. Uh, I learned a lot from one single session about that. Now, if you actually need to explain to, let's say, a management, oh well, we don't need to spend, why we do need to spend effort and time on research instead of just relying on AI, I would say that it's always a question of, I mean, we are designing for end users, so we better really know at least a little bit about what the struggles are, rather than just have a bunch of assumptions, because assumptions are very, very expensive. And I would try to fit my narrative, I guess, into anything that has been turned out to be an issue based on assumptions alone. Very often, almost every company has at least one project that failed because there was a very strong statement or assumptions or bias towards something, and that turned out to be not right. That's extremely expensive. I mean, I'm so surprised. It's just so shocking to me that those things are literally expensive. I mean, we're talking about, I don't know how many man hours, right? But then spending 2 days or 1 week on research is out of question. This is just out of this world. This is just totally unbelievable.
It's an extreme gamble to just depend on simulations and not on opinions of real users. And in my opinion, one of the key problems with AI simulations is that AI will always try to be right regardless of what it has to be, what it has to done or do to be right. And if the AI does not know what to do, it will imagine what to do
Mm,
and try regardless. You will never hear AI say, okay, I don't know how to do this. There will always be a simulation,
yeah.
and it will not be accurate because people are not accurate. People are not always right, and that's one aspect which in my opinion is dearly missing from AI simulations
Yeah,
compared to
I would say
users.
that there are a couple of points to that as well. I think that just to briefly build on top of that, I think I think we often underestimate the ingenuity, I guess, of a human being, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we really do. And first of all, we know, of course, that what people say, what people think, what people do, and how they behave are all very often very different things. So you cannot rely on what people write, what people say, what people are supposed to behave like. And even if you bring in a bit of randomness, I need to see how users are doing that. I mean, this is important for me. I mean, really being able to perceive what the experience is like. I mean, sure enough, we could do simulations and they might be supporting our journey and some of the decisions, but they must be complementary to the other work that we're doing. I mean, this is, of course, my perspective on that, and I might be totally biased. But I'm not working for UX Tweak or any similar products. I just want to say, right? But I find so much more value by literally speaking to a person. Just one thing on that is that in the same way that to me AI is a simulation, I find that a lot of customer journeys that we're designing are also a simulation because customer journeys very often represent the ideal state, the ideal scenarios that we are designing, hoping that the person is going to go for that thing, then to this thing, then to that thing, then to that thing. And I find that most of the time that's not going to be true because it's a lot of movement in between and shortcuts and clicking on the wrong things and ending up somewhere entirely different place. So it's kind of the same story. So observing really helps you to create a clearer frame of reference and accurately map the problem space, the reality into the problem space. So it's very, I mean, I probably have too strong opinion on that.
Yeah, and I think we could have like a hour-long discussion just
I
about
think we
this.
should. I think we should.
Okay, so let's pinpoint that in for the future and for the part number two, for example. Okay, so let's move to another question. Does task success rate have has to be measured quantitatively, or is it enough to measure it with only few people qualitatively?
Very good point. In fact, let me show you. So my dear colleague, who I have a privilege to be working with, am I sharing? Can you see the screen?
Uh, I think we will be able to switch that so the people can see it on the stream just in a moment.
Sure, no problem. So I'm just going to
Yes, they can see it now. So
Okay, fantastic. So, a colleague of mine, Jerry, has been coming up with this idea of top tasks has been working on this idea of top tasks for a very long time now. And what we tend to do is most of the time presenting top tasks very much like this. Sorry about the colors. That's something I have to correct, right? So basically, we try to create these charts where we're measuring the task completion rate and we're also measuring the percentage of participants who actually complete, right? And also how much time they actually need, with the threshold being, then again, at this point, the failure. In a presentation, it could look something like this, right? Where we have success rates and success times. And remember, again, as I was highlighting the snapshots that we are tracking, these are the 4 baseline, current status, target state, and industry benchmark, right? And now to your question about, what about qualitative research? Do we, how far do we go there? Well, I would say, this is just something I wanted to highlight. I would say that what we always need, just a moment, I just need to find here we go. What we typically have discovered, I just need to find it here in
it's a
this
lot of
mess.
slides.
Oh yeah, this is like there's a lot of stuff here. Yes, what we have found is that when you bring in something between 15 to 18 participants, you repeatedly see the same pattern emerging over and over. Now this is moderated, and this is qualitative testing where we bring people in and we observe them, right? And usually you would see that the time that on task and also task success rate, they begin to stabilize somewhere around participant 15, 16. So if you have more than 20 people, I tend to rely on those insights, right? So if you see that of 20 people, 19 were able to complete a task within 1.5 minutes with a one outlier, that gives us an indicator that we're performing better than before. And even, sorry, even if it's not like an ultimate outcome, you can still say that, okay, the user experience has been improving, because if you bring in 20 people and kind of gets better, steadily gets better over time, then you're in a good place.
Yeah, I think one additional challenge with this might be convincing the stakeholders
This
that
is enough.
this is enough, because they read about the statistical significance, and that you need at least that amount of responses, or that amount of responses, and you come to them with 20 people, and it might be easy for them to dismiss this at first, and so that might be the challenge, to convince them actually about this, that it's
Yes,
enough.
I mean, you kind of, I mean, the thing is like with the task completion, right, is that we want to monitor what people are doing and ask questions. So obviously you cannot bring hundreds of people. That's just too much of an effort.
Yeah.
I mean, you still could complement it with something like customer effort score. We try to understand how well people are going through this task in the end. In a product, within the product, you can still do that. That depends, of course, on the company culture and
Yeah.
what is accepted and what's not.
Yeah. But it's always a challenge. The last
Yeah.
challenge in the process is to convince the stakeholders about the results of the research. Okay, so next up we have, how do you know competition benchmarks? I think
Good
this
point.
relates to the point when you described how to compare yourself with the competition. And I was watching the chat as you talked about it, and there were a few points about stuff such as you need to get the users of both platforms or neither of the platforms. You have to have the same amount of responses and stuff like this. So if you can just give a few points on how to do this properly, that would be lovely.
Yeah, well, in our case, to be honest, it wasn't like we had to get, like I say, a license for another product or something like that. So the way we do it is we have, like I say, public service, right? We need to be able to deliver the answer fast, right? So just an example. So we're working right now on the European Parliament's website, and there is a massive, of course, search engine, and there's a lot of information available in 26 languages. So obviously that's a lot. What I mean with competition is not necessarily a direct competition, like competitive product, but it could be a similar product, right? What I mean by that, for example, it could be the government of the UK. We could look how fast do people find information about, I don't know, about a specific piece of legislation or so on gov.uk compared to how they do it on Parliament. Obviously, there are different tasks. This could be slightly different tasks and they require slightly different effort. But the point is to kind of establish some sort of expectations about where we should be. What is considered to be a good experience? So if you're looking for a piece of information for, I don't know, 7 minutes, that's probably not what you would get in a good user experience today. And you might say, well, why even bother? Because we have AI. Well, what we have learned, by the way, within the European Parliament, that around 10% of all responses to some of the queries that people sent are wrong, factually wrong, because Google provides wrong snippets, right? Or things that are not necessarily matching the user's intent. And then, of course, it ends up landing in ChatGPT and Perplexity as well, and Claude as well, right? And so, from our end, what's important is to understand, you know, what is the type of product that we're designing. If it's a financial stock screener or financial broker or something, okay, so let's see if we look at some of the tasks that people are performing in our product, right? Well, let's find people who are using this other product, or maybe using both indeed, as somebody suggested, and let's see how fast people can actually find answer to the same question. Maybe selecting a couple of filters, figuring out the right, defining the right attributes or values in the data table, right? How much time do they need in both? And that's probably how we would do it. In fact, if you can find people who are using another platform but not yours, that's maybe even better, right? Of course, they must be in the same profile in some way. You can't just take, let's say, an expert with 15 years of experience using that product and somebody who has just started using it in our end. So it kind of need to be comparable. And that's a question then if you can find them. But again, there are quite a few tools that allow you to do that. One, I mean, also in the B2B space, by the way. So there are plenty of platforms that allow you to find people. The question is if you are willing to take that part. I mean, if you don't want to do that benchmarking, I mean, I would do it at least once, just to get a sense about where people are, where we should be at in the worst scenario.
Mhm. And do you think there is like a rule of thumb of how many competitions you want to compare to yourself? Because if you just pick one competitor, you can by chance pick an outlier in either side, and it can lead to an unfair comparison or
That's right.
a overly optimistic comparison.
Well,
So,
we always try to look at the best competitor, to
mhm,
be honest. So best could mean many different things, of course. It doesn't have to be the most successful one,
mhm,
but the one that has the most loyal user base. I think this is actually even more important sometimes. Because sometimes you find some very cheap options that people just use, but they're not necessarily performing best. So, and also you will not be able to move them from to help to move people from that cheap competitor to you if you have a premium product. So you kind of need to look at maybe the best competitor in your space, right? That is also have comparable pricing, right?
mhm,
But also performs best, right? So I don't know, even things like I don't know, things like recent redesign or so sometimes are an indicator that they probably are very much design driven, right? If you have somebody who is been around in the market for 15 years, sure, they will have very loyal user base because somebody has been using this product for 15 years, right? And you want to be probably at in the worst case as good as they are, but you typically want to be at least a little bit better than your best competitor.
mhm. I understand that in the business space, it's the best competitor that you would be comparing yourself to. But I wanted to learn more about the specific use case that you mentioned with the European Parliament. How you can pick a best competitor in a case like this when there is no pricing, there is no customer base and stuff like this, because each government side will have the customer size of the own country, and picking a competition, uh, quote unquote, in this case might be difficult, right?
Yes. So in our case, what we're trying to orient ourselves are some, I would say, leading in terms of design and UX work, some of the leading institutions around the world that are excelling and really put like UX first and user-centric experience first on the agenda very, very, very high. I mean, I'm probably not going to call names at this point, but
Of course.
typically we'll be looking at the best in our space and not necessarily like legal, because again it's not like, oh, let's be the best of the parliaments, because why not? Well, that's not the point. The point is to be perceived as an institution, right? We need to be at least as good as the best one. This is kind
Mhm.
of the ambition behind that. And so we'll look at some of the efforts that are being produced by different teams around the world, right, especially in that public service space, and this is kind of our goal, to be at least as good.
Okay. Thank you. That's
Sure,
all.
sure.
That's a great explanation. Okay, so we have a few more questions. Let's go through those. So first of all, um, how design system helps in multiple density phone screens to achieve UI. So basically, how to use a design system with different resolutions, as I understand it.
That's a good question. I mean, I just try to understand what it would be. I think the important part that we often miss, I think, and this is again indeed something that is really important to me when I ask this question about 12 tasks. Give me 12 tasks. Is not only what tasks people are performing, but how they perform these tasks. Very often you will find that your wonderful product and your wonderful application is one of the 26 tabs that that poor person has in front of them when they're working on their thing, right?
Yeah.
And also, it could be that they have free screens, and on all of them, there is something flickering, flashing, and whatever all time long. That's very important for us to know. Like this sort of context about where our product is being used and how it's being used is at least as important as the task that people are performing, right? And so, if you know, let's say that people are using a lot of screens and they are performing tasks on those screens, Well, then I think the question that I would ask is not necessarily how to use a design system for that, but how to organize content in a way that it would be most efficient for that end user. And so sometimes it means, and I've seen and I've been in such situations in the past, you need to show everything on a single screen. There is a use case for that. I mean, of course, from a wonderful designer's perspective, that would be daunting and horrible and no white space. But I mean, I think that when you look in some of the B2B products and enterprise products, white space is the first thing that is finding its way out of the product. So sometimes you have this case, and then you basically plaster the entire screen with information and data that people find relevant. If it's experts, over time, people anyway learn how to use a product, how to get used to it, and they kind of start looking at it through the lens of sort of islands almost, where they focus their attention on just some areas or some features or some things or some pages and ignore everything else. So I'm not sure how design systems specifically would fit into that, but this would be my way of going around that and really thinking about the density of information, because in the end, the complexity of the product must match the complexity of the expertise or the expertise of the person who is going to use it.
Okay, so next up we have a question about feedback scoring and gap analysis. You mentioned that you would be showing an
Yes.
example of that. People would love to see that.
Yes, for
So
sure.
again, if we can switch the screen so that
Yes,
people can see the
please.
example.
Fantastic. So this is a wonderful little pattern, and I can show it a bit more. Just sorry, my friends. I think I kind of lost my voice a little bit yesterday. I'm not even sure what happened. It's actually quite hot outside, and I'm losing voice. Very strange. So let me show you what I mean by that. So feedback scoring is actually remarkably simple. Now, this is building up on top of what most businesses want to know. Most businesses want to know the NPS story, right? The infamous NPS question, which is, let me just show you here. Below it NPS. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend our product to a friend of colleague? Now, this is NPS score, and the way of how it's calculated, as you probably have seen, is percentage of promoters, which is 9 and 10, minus percentage of detractors, 0 to 6, and then out of that, we get a number. Now, on its own, NPS is very fragile, it's very easy to game and stuff like that. So we could try to twist it. Because many businesses are familiar with this, and they almost have a lot of belief that this is the thing, we could try to tweak the question. Maybe asking it a little bit differently. Like, oh no, and now I just had it and now I lost it again. Now I think I really have to reorganize my slide deck. This is not how it should be. So here we go. What we could do is say, right, well, let's just twist the question a little bit. So feedback scoring gap analysis is a combination of feedback scoring and guess what? Gap analysis. So with the feedback scoring, we turn qualitative feedback into data that we can quantify. You'll see in a moment what it means. And then we have gap analysis where we try to identify where we want to be and move there. So first, we do what? Well, first of all, we survey users. We send users a survey with up to 5 statements they can strongly disagree or strongly agree with. And they can rank how much they agree or disagree on that scale. That would pretty much look like this. The product is easy to integrate into my existing workflows. Strongly disagree, strongly agree, right? Obviously, when we're sending it, we're basically segmenting by type and audiences, and then we plot the results. So we get the responses, and then we can create something like a little spider chart like that. So we have 5 statements, and with each of them from a scale from 0 to 5 over here. And so we have these 5 statements that people can agree or disagree with. Now, of course, it's a survey, it's self-reported, so it's very unreliable and stuff like that. But if you send it to a lot of people, I think a couple of thousands of people, you will get a lot of responses, and then you can actually do something with that. And then what you do, oh, by the way, hold on for a moment. In this case, right, just to make this connection with NPS, instead of saying how likely are you to recommend a soap and so on and so forth, we could twist it and say, have you recommended or not? Right? So have you recommended our product or survey to a friend or colleague? Yes or no? And then we can ask how frequently people actually do that. So that depends on how we actually phrase it. All right. So with that, then, what you say is, well, let's just set goals of where we want to be. Right? What is the sort of the sentiment that we want to improve here? and over the next time period that we have. So we could be moving something like this. So this is where we want to be. And our design initiatives should kind of move in this direction over there. And we could try to break it down depending on the type of users that we have. Like we could break it down by new users and experienced users, free users or paying users, and so on and so forth. And then we'll gather this information and kind of try to make sense about on where we currently are. And this is coming from a wonderful framework. This is how we actually ended up using it for search results. I was able to find what I was looking for. Search suggestions were useful and helpful. Filters are clear and easy to understand. Search results are clear and helpful. Oh, I mean, these are just examples again, right? And you might want to also, alternate between positive and negative statements. The support team was responsive and helpful, right? And you kind of do that. And as a result of that, you end up with some overview about how well you're performing. Now, if you're looking into this and you want to explore a bit more of that, you can look into Fit Scoring and Gap Analysis by Anna Debenham. Just if you type in feedback scoring and gap analysis, you'll probably find it. It's kind of a very simple way to twist and move from NPS in a way that businesses often understand.
Okay, I think that was a great example which explained what this is
I
all
have one
about.
more.
There is another one. Okay,
Yes, I
okay,
just want to highlight
okay.
it. I think that this is something that's often missing. And again, because I'm under the weather today, I just maybe didn't explain it well, but I just want to make sure that the point is coming across. Now, I talked about these metrics, right? But there is one thing which kind of highlights how it all comes together. And sometimes, dear friends, I feel like maybe, I don't know, I'm taking over the role of a PM, although I'm not a PM. Where is the boundary between PM and designer who is doing all kind of metric stuff? And one interesting framework that has emerged by Adrian Raudashel, who wrote about this, is the so-called TARS product metric. And the way of how it works is it's basically a combination of 4 different things that you might want to track, unlike success rate, unlike time on task or anything else. We're basically looking at target users, active users, retention, and satisfaction scores to evaluate what to work on next. Now, why is it so important? Well, because we're basically trying to understand how well a particular feature meets user needs to deliver on business outcome that is desired. And it has 4 components: TARS, target users, active users, retention, and satisfaction. First, when we decide on an idea that we want to work on, we quantify the target audience we're speaking to. So do we think that 100% of all our users will benefit from it? Or is it only enterprise? Or is it only B2C sector? Or is it only this bunch of countries, and so on and so forth? The question we're asking ourselves is, what percentage of all our products users have that specific problem that my feature aims to solve? If you think about, like I say, new features you want to build, this is a question we'll be asking ourselves, right? Now, in the end, it will look like this, right? We have this target user base that we're kind of trying to attract. And then from there, we're looking how many people who actually are our target user base will adopt a feature or use it at least once. And then who will be using it and how many will be using it frequently. And in the end, how satisfied will they be with that? So the first is the target base, right? The second is adoption. Well, we'll look into the number of unique users who engage with that feature that we designed over a specific time period. So we'll look into what percentage of active target users actually use our feature to solve their problem. Sometimes you might have very low adoption, right? Maybe below 40%. That's pretty low. Sometimes you might have something in the middle, 40 to 60%. Sometimes you might have above 60%, maybe like 60 or 80%. That's usually quite high number. That's pretty good. So that gives us an insight about how well adopted it is. The higher the score, the more significant impact that feature actually produces. Not very surprising. Low score means not necessarily that it's not usable or that it's a bad feature. We always need to be very careful there, because typically it could be that there are easy workarounds, so people use something else to do the same thing still, and they rely on that workaround, or that there is poor discovery of that feature, it's just not clearly communicated, or we overscope target users, or it could be that we just should maybe include it as a part of onboarding or something like that. It might be that we're just not explaining it well enough, right? But in the end, we're looking at first, again, the target audience, and then we're looking at adoption. And after that, we'll look at retention. That specifically means if a feature solves a problem, right? Well, then let's see how people actually rely on it, how often they rely on it. We measure the frequency of use of that feature. So if the retention is over 50%, that means that it has a high importance because a lot of people actually keep using it. It's not like just 50% of adopted users actually keep using it, right? Which is actually a good signal. So we ask ourselves, of all the unique visitors who meaningfully adopted the feature or used it at least once, how many actually came back to that feature to use it again, right? From there, then, you get from target users to adopt it to retain. That usually will go down because this will not be 100% all the time. And then the other thing that is really missing then, to kind of bring it back to user-centric stuff, is the satisfaction score. Because here we measure how satisfied customers are with a feature by asking them, that question maybe with the technique I showed before. Of all the retained users, we ask how easy it was to solve a problem after they used the feature today. This could be customer effort score, right? Where we could say, let's just take a look overall, how easy was it to solve a problem after you used a feature today? Much more difficult, as expected, easier than expected, and much easier than expected. And out of that, we calculate a score. Beware with me, dear friends. It's all okay, right? It's a bit mathematics, but it's okay. It's nothing groundbreaking. We are dividing the percentage of satisfied users by the percentage of target users. So for example, if there is a bulk import feature, we have advertised and we assume that it will be around 80% of users adopting it. Who might find it useful. As it turned out, only 50% of them actually used it at least once. And then 70% of those who used it at least once kept using it for a while. That's a pretty good signal. And then 90% of those who actually ended up using it over time actually remained satisfied, right? So that gives us a score because we have 90% of 70% of 50% of 80%. That gives us altogether 25.2% of all users satisfied with that feature. And if we break down that number by the overall target audience that we were looking at, we get 0.315, right? Well, you might say, okay, so that's a number, so whatever. Well, what's with that? Well, and then we can map it against ST score versus strategic importance. If you find some features living over here, high strategic importance, but very low ST score, meaning it's not being used at all, then we know that we made a mistake. If we keep working on this feature, maybe we need to rebuild it, maybe we need to rework it altogether, but that seems to be a waste and drain of resources. Maybe we should flag that. On the other hand, if you have something that has high strategic importance, we know that people are doing it, it has high ST score, that's great. We want that. That's the core features we want to advertise, right? You might also have some things that have very low strategic importance, but also very low ST score, but maybe just a bug fix, and maybe only a small portion of users is using it anyway, so that's kind of okay, right? But you also might have found this, where you thought that this is not important, very low strategic importance, but a lot of people are using it. So that's maybe an indicator that we need to look into that feature and see what else is in that space to explore maybe similar things that can really bring value to people. And once you understand that, you can have a wonderful conversation with your PMs where you can decide on the next features you're going to work on, which are going to be both business-centric and user-centric at the same time. I think it's really rare that you will find situations where you can actually achieve that. Because very often we believe that business is almost against the users, but we need to be very clear. No business can be successful without successful customers. So we just need to twist it and explain it and show it in a way that makes sense. And I think that to me, that kind of makes sense.
It does. Thank you for a great explanation. We had reactions from chat that people have not seen this before, so I think that was real nice for them to learn about this. And we have one last question, which I think wraps up this webinar lovely. Can we create other metrics beside that, what you have told us today?
Which one? You mean like which metrics? Metrics.
Well,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
create
Not
a new
metrics.
metric.
Metrics. Yeah, 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 sure. I mean, whatever works for you. I think that in many ways, it's all about what is the value that the user is getting. I mean, there was a wonderful article by Jared Spool. Will I be able to find it? Metrics matter something? I think maybe even this one. I think no, but he wrote, if you look at UIE, somewhere he was writing about the metrics that would be okay. Now I have to find it really. So I keep running into my bookmarks chaos because I always find some interesting articles and I don't find the content that I actually want to highlight. Um, just a moment, please bear with me. I think I will be able to find it shortly. Yes, here we go. Here we go. So this one
Okay,
here.
so if we can show Vitaly's screen again.
Oh, yes, sure.
Okay, so how the right UX metrics show game-changing values.
Yes,
That's the
and
article.
what Jared speaks about or writes about here is that they ended up creating very different metrics, like the total number of invoices sent, the number of invoices that included the Pay Now button. Whatever they changes, it kind of must be local. This is something I didn't mention. So to indicate and explain that impact, it must be closely related to the work that you're doing. So you cannot just say, I'm going to rework my filters, and as a result, conversion rate went up. You cannot connect it this way. But if you can say, well, I adjusted filters and let's see filters usage rate or anything like that. That could be how often or how quickly do people actually set up 5 most popular filters in our product now compared to previous times, right? So it definitely should be, I think, custom as well. So for sure. So the answer is yes.
Okay, so thank you again, everyone, for joining us with Vitaly today. And Vitaly, thank you
Sure.
so much for all the insights that you were able to share with us. So, if there are any last words of wisdom that you want to share with the people who joined us today as a wrap up, feel free to do so now.
I mean, I would say the only thing that's worth mentioning is that it sounds maybe a little bit daunting, like metrics and measurements, and how do we make it to work and so on and so forth. It's not. It kind of becomes a part of what you're doing. It's like every now, I would say that just maybe get into a habit that whenever you're ideating, coming up with ideas, just before you're presenting them to your PM, think about the metric that would be kind of indicating if you are improving something or not, user-centric metric, right? So if you're working on filters, again, filter usage rate. If you're working on search quality score, just maybe always attach a metric to whatever it is that you are working on. And as we're on it, I don't know, are we sharing the screen still?
Not now,
Okay,
but
then
we
that's
can
okay.
switch if you want to.
Yeah, I just want to mention that if you want to explore more, I go into a lot of detail in like we have this little training which we're going to have
Mhm.
in a month on measuring UX, going into all the fine details of that. So if you're interested, I would absolutely love to have you. And again, if you go to measureux.com, you will find it.
Okay, so I think everyone who decides to join you for the additional learning with you will not then will be happy about that.
I
I'm
hope
sure.
so.
And before we leave, let's say goodbye to all the people who joined us today. Thank you again, everybody who took your time to join us today and enjoy the presentation with Vitaly. If you are looking to join similar webinars, such as today's webinar, we'll be having a next one on May 22nd with Amanda Gelb about how to master stakeholders interviews, which, in my opinion, again, might be a nice topic for everybody to
For
join.
sure.
So please use the link in the description to learn more about the upcoming webinar. And again, thank you, Vitaly, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and everybody who joined learned so much from you. Thank you so much
Thank you
again.
so much for having me. And see you next time, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. And sorry about the
Goodbye,
losing
everybody.
voice.
Thank
Bye bye.
you. Bye bye.